fear is really your subconscious mind trying to keep you alive. And for some reason, your subconscious is trying to tell you that it thinks you are going to die. And so there's always a reason. Let me give you an example of this. I went to an amusement park once, and I'd been there before, and I was about to ride this roller coaster that's quite crazy. And even though I'd ridden it before, suddenly I felt like a lot of anxiety over it, like more so than normal. And so I asked my subconscious, I said, okay, subconscious, clearly you're not comfortable with this. What are you trying to tell me? And my subconscious answered back and said, this is dangerous. You're going to die. And having unearthed what my subconscious was trying to tell me, I was able to tell my subconscious, having this conversation, actually, this is designed for fun and for safety. And I was able to kind of logically work my way through telling my subconscious, do you see how that cart is attached to that track? There's no way it's coming off. And, there's health certificates and there's safety certificates. And by identifying my fear, asking my subconscious what was going on and being able to tell my subconscious, I appreciate you. Thank you for bringing this up. The reality is it isn't as bad as you think. The fear left. And we can do something similar here. And so there's a whole process on how to do that. The first step is really understanding how we feel. So if you're trying to be successful in sales and there is fear, you got to dig into that fear a little bit. And the way that you do that, I like to do it through kind of a meditative process. And you can either do this with closed eyes or just go into a quiet room. And a little side note, if at any time you go through this process and you start feeling like incredibly anxious or not feeling good, stop. Okay, this isn't something you have to do, but this is something that's useful. But if it's overwhelming, stop and work with a therapist to work through this. And I'm serious about that. There's a reason why some of the most successful sports teams have a therapist on staff to help them become successful, to help them overcome their fear. It's a real thing. Allow yourself to feel that feeling, whether it be anxiety or fear or sadness or whatever it might be. But you're only going to do it to the moment that you can feel what that feeling is. But think of it as proximity. Like you can imagine that fear as an object, and you can move it as close as you need to where you start to feel it, but it isn't overpowering and overwhelming. By doing this, you're able to actually identify what it is. So once you start feeling that discomfort, ask yourself, okay, how do I feel? What specifically is this uncomfortability? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it restlessness? What is it? Now, once you have identified what that feeling is, now you're going to ask your subconscious, what are you trying to tell me? Because what we want to do is we want to identify this fear. Because once we identify it, then we can move forward with it. And so we ask our subconscious, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to warn me about? And typically there's 3 different kinds of fears that we have. One is the fear of failure. Another one is a fear of success. I know this one sounds weird, but a lot of people suffer from this, and you might be one of those people. I know that I had this at one time. My fear when I was starting my own business and running it was that if I became too successful, I would lose my time because I'd be so busy. And to me, time is a huge motivator. I always want to have enough time. So anything that takes away time scares me. And so fear of success became a real thing. And then the third element is one that a lot of times in sales we suffer from, the fear of rejection. We've already talked about how to overcome that in different ways, but we want to get to the core and overcome it from the subconscious component, if that makes sense. Now comes the next step. Typically, there's a moment that created this fear. And there's a reason why your subconscious is trying to warn you, because there may have been a past event where you had success and it ended up being bad, or you had failure and it ended up being very painful, or you were rejected. And this one was an interesting one for me because actually in preparing this presentation, I've done this before, but in preparing this presentation, I actually went back and did that. And I realized that I still had some fear of rejection. And so I took it back to a moment and asked my subconscious, what moment, what specific time started this fear? And it was something so simple. It was something where I had done something for somebody, unasked, that was an act of love. And when they saw what I had done, instead of thanking me, they criticized it, which was not very cool of them. But at the same time, looking back, this was when I was a lot younger. Looking back, I realized like they probably had a bad day. And so they didn't mean to drive that fear, or they didn't mean to drive that criticism. But as a result, I've carried on a little bit of fear of rejection for years, for decades. And so going through this, I was able to then resolve it, which then alleviated that fear. And we can do the same. And so there's two ways that you can resolve this. And for more on this, you may want to ask a therapist about something called EMDR. There's actually, this is like a subconscious, this is like a sliver of what EMDR is. But a lot of times what happens is these trauma moments, whether they be large trauma moments or very small ones like I had. I mean, that was a very small moment, but it did have an effect on me, right? So what we have to do, these trauma points, they're not processed correctly. And so they stand out, and it's kind of like having a sliver in your finger. It's going to continue to be painful until you remove it. And, you may not even notice the sliver in your finger until you go to do something specific and you're like, ow, that really hurts. You have to get it removed. You have to process those feelings. So one way to do this is to give it new meaning. And what I mean by this is a lot of times we go through moments of failure, right? Or moments of rejection, and we get stuck with the defining of that moment from the person we were at that moment. But that's without seeing the full picture. So let me give you an example of this. I worked with a lady who was high up in a company, and she really struggled with relationships with higher ups, specifically with males. And it all went back to this moment that she had done something not smart when she was in high school, and her dad like laid into her and yelled at her. And then he died a couple days later. And because of that, she was stuck feeling guilty and feeling disconnected with her dad. Well, we were able to go through and take a look at that from an adult lens and reinfuse new meaning. And she was able to see that her dad would be really proud of her now for everything she's done. And that moment actually sparked her towards her passion to show how powerful she could be. And so by realizing that that moment actually defined her and set her up for a successful future, she was able to move past that. The second way we do this is we can actually replace the memory with something a little bit outrageous. So you can do this in two ways. If there's a place that is connected with that moment, go back to that place and do something successful instead. So if you had a bad breakup with a girl at a specific spot, go back to that spot with your new girlfriend and give her a kiss. Now you've had a positive experience there. The other way you can do this is you can imagine it, right? So I had a painful memory once that is something that didn't go well. And so what I had in my mind was, in that moment, I imagined a dinosaur coming in and tearing through and like picking up the culprit and like carrying the person away. And it was so funny in my mind, it made me laugh and it helped me move on. So this can be extremely powerful. Go through and do this as many times as you need, and you will find such a significant sense of relief by doing this. Now, if the fear remains, even though you've done this, make sure you thank your conscious, but if it still remains, go ahead and talk to a therapist. It's worth it. It really is. And go ahead and get rid of your fear. Clear the way so that you have a clear path to success. If you do this, I promise you, you're going to feel brand new and ready to conquer the world.